It never ceases to amaze me. I don't pick the songs or the slides or anything that happens, but it never ceases to amaze me how God connects these things. Can you guys go back a couple slides real quick on the projector to the beginning of Our God is an Awesome God? We don't have to listen to the whole song. I want to point something out here. Let it play for a second on Our God is an Awesome. Yes, perfect. You ready to pause it? Pause it right there. Did you guys see the symbol that appeared there?
Yeah.
It said Patmos underneath. God is always speaking. And it's in these little details. These little things that we just move past. If you get pain or you're going through life concerned about a lot of stuff, you miss these little things. But I want to read something to you. So that symbol that looks like an upside down horseshoe above Patmos is actually it's a Greek letter, and it's the letter omega. So if you're reading a Greek word and you see that symbol omega, it's an O sound. But it's the last letter, kind of like we've got Z in the English alphabet as the last letter. It's the last letter. And let me read to you the last conversation I had last night with a fella that called me. He was in Kentucky. And he's the kind of guy that God is that God is speaking to in numbers, kind of like I'm always seeing numbers and stuff. But last night at 8:10 p.m., he texted me Revelations 1:11. I said, oh, okay, I didn't know what Revelations 1:11 is. But he was looking at it because he had made an investment and it had gone up to $1.11. So he was paying attention to 1:11 and looking at scriptures about 1:11 and stuff. And so I go to Revelations 1:11. It says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last. And what you see, write in a book and send it to the 7 churches which are in Asia, Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamos, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and to Laodicea. So one of the last conversations I had last night, I was talking about the name of God as the Alpha and the Omega. And without planning it, it pops up today, first thing, the Omega on Patmos. Specifically to me, the name Omega stood out to me. And this is, I didn't plan on saying any of this, but for me, Omega started sticking out to me here about 2 months ago. I was on a run, and a horseshoe is on the ground, which I don't know how common that is. Probably fairly common around here, being there's a lot of horses. But I'm on the road running, and I see this horseshoe, and I pick it up, and I took it home. I thought, well, that's neat. I've never found a horseshoe on the road before. And I was reading in this book, and this guy says, if God comes as the Alpha to start something, He'll come as the Omega to finish it. And I'd always thought of Him as the Alpha and the Omega, but never as the Omega specifically. Like, you always hear those two together, but they're both true, which means you can call Him the Alpha, or you can call Him the Omega, or you can call Him the Alpha and the Omega. And specifically for me, what he was talking about is God being the finisher of things. When He starts it, He finishes it. And for me, when I picked up that horseshoe, I was like, oh, this is where the rubber meets the road. When God comes as the Omega, that's where a horse, it's where its foot meets the ground. I was like, this is about the rubber meeting the road. And so I was looking at the Omega, and the name of God being that He's the finisher. It says in Scripture, He's the author and perfecter or finisher of our faith. He makes the rubber meet the road, which is where the horse's shoe is. And to cap this little thing off, I looked up what the word Patmos means, because underneath that it says Patmos. And it's actually where John was imprisoned at the end of his life. They tried to kill him by boiling him in oil and all these different things, and they couldn't kill him. It's documented. And so they imprisoned him on the island of Patmos. But anyways, I looked up what Patmos means, and Patmos means to walk. Where the rubber meets the road, the shoe of a horse. It's crazy how all these things come together. So anyways, that was just a little something I was noticing this morning that fascinated me that God's speaking. As I was praying about the sermon this week, I had probably no less than 3 sermons come into my heart. I feel like we're in a very fruitful time And it's hard for me to pare it all down because I feel like God is saying so much. But if I'm to distill all this down for what I think we're supposed to know today, there's a couple things I wanted to talk about. One of the things I'm going to be talking about either this week or next week is about worship in spirit and truth. So probably next week, but that's John chapter 4, the woman at the well. But this week I had someone ask me during one of our prayer nights, they said, how do you know if you're humble? What is humility? And I said, oh, that's a really good question. How do you know if you're humble? And they had watched a video about, a guy who had died and seen the Lord. And the Lord took him to hell in this video and showed him all the people in hell. And he saw all these people that were even Christians that they were there because they weren't humble. Now, mind you, I'm just quoting what someone said to me this week. But they watched this video about the importance of humility and how we need to stay out of pride. And I said, how do we know that we're humble? And what is humility? Because many people think that humility means you have no identity at all. So, because there's so much confusion in our culture, if I'm humble, then it's, everything is everyone else's, and I don't have a say in anything, and I better just, humble myself, go lower, I don't have anything to say. But I think that's actually a perversion of true humility. And some of that is actually false humility. Because sometimes God puts things in us to say. Sometimes there are places and times when we need to bring our opinion to the table. But there are places and times that we've been used to in our society where people bring their opinion to the table too much. And so we're in an overcorrection right now, I think. But I want to talk about this for a little bit. What is true humility? And I had a phrase come to my mind as I was thinking about true humility. And it's from Psalms chapter 40. I believe it's verse 7. Psalms chapter 40, verse 7. And this is a psalm of David. So I'm going to go back and read verse 1 just because we've been in this season. I waited patiently for the Lord, and he inclined and he heard my cry. We've been learning how to wait on the Lord. He brought me up out of a horrible pit, out of the miry clay, and set my feet upon a rock and established my steps. He has put a new song in my mouth, praise to our God. Many will see it and fear and will trust in the Lord. Blessed is that man who makes the Lord his trust and does not respect the proud, nor such as turn aside to lies. Many, O Lord my God, are your wonderful works which you have done, and your thoughts toward us cannot be recounted to you in order. If I would declare and speak of them, they are more than can be numbered. Sacrifice and offering you did not desire. My ears you have opened. Burnt offering and sin offering you did not require. And now we're going to get to verse 7 here. And this is the one that as I was pondering humility, this is what I started to chew on. He said, then I said, behold, I come in the scroll of the book it is written of me. What does that mean? And who's he talking to? This is David. Who's he saying that to? Then I said, behold, I come in the scroll of the book it is written of me. What does that mean? And who is he talking to? I'm going to give you my 2 cents on this one. I believe that David is first and foremost declaring that to the Lord. And I believe the Lord wrote this book about David. I come in the fullness. Well, that was my wording, but I come in the scroll of the book it is written of me. It takes a certain kind of confidence or a certain kind of something to be able to say that. I mean, even if you're not talking to God, imagine going to someone who's putting you on the spot. What gives you the right to be here? I come in the scroll of the book that's written of me. The next time you guys are having trouble and someone's coming against you, you just set that one on the table and see what happens. At the very least, it'll throw them for a loop, right? What does that mean? I come in the scroll of the book that is written of me. Remember, we're talking about humility, and there is a false humility, and there is a thing that you pretend to certain things. Like, it's very popular in our society to make nice. Pretend, just not to hurt anyone's feelings. Consider their feelings because they're more important than ours. Which you are supposed to prefer your brothers. But there's a fake thing that's happening also where you pretend. And it robs the heart of life. We are not meant to walk around being pretenders. There's a time when you can hold something if it's bothering you. You don't always have to go around and tell everyone what you feel all the time. That's not what I'm saying. But when you're scared to talk about something that's inside and you pretend like it's not there, that will rob you of your heart. And many people have been so used to walking around pretending that there's something that they're not. Or pretending like everything's okay so that no one will judge them. That they're just like shells walking around like zombies. How are you today? I'm good. Life's good. Yeah. I had a really good week. Yeah, things are going well. You know, like, I'm being facetious, of course. But we've started walking around without our hearts. And we've been living from our heads. So as we talk about humility, and David making the statement, I come in the scroll of the book that is written of me. There's a process that God wants to take everyone on. And if I were to explain, you guys have heard a lot of it, but if I were to explain the process that got my family and I to this place, to where I'm in this church speaking this morning, it's crazy. It is crazy every step that God has taken, even through the past year being here, everything that's happened that has put us in this point. But I can tell you I'm 100% certain this morning, and I don't believe I'm saying this with any pride, but I believe, I have faith in this statement, that me standing here this morning is ordained by God. And that has nothing to do with, oh, Adam's done this right or that right, or me tooting my own horn. I believe God decided it was so, and that's why we're here. And statements like that scare people in our society because they say, how can you know what God is saying? How can you be sure? That's the question in everyone's heart and mind. Well, let me ask you this. And I would say the same to anyone that would say that to me. How are you sure that where you're standing in life is where you're supposed to be standing? And most of them would say, well, I'm not sure. Then if no one's sure about anything, how do we have anywhere to stand? Period. If everything's up in the air and nothing is settled and God hasn't decided anything, then nothing matters. It all can be whatever. Let's just go this way or go that way, or maybe it's all okay and it doesn't matter. That's why they're taking God out of things. Out of schools, out of conversations. That's why you don't hear the name Jesus on the news. Because it's meant to undermine purpose. If there's no God, then it doesn't matter. And the guy who has the biggest guns or the most money or whatever it is, he's the guy that decides for everybody else at that point. Because if you believe there's no moral right, or there's no one at the end of the day who's watching out for mankind, then it becomes my power against your power. Can I beat you up? Can I outsmart you? Can I fill in the blank? But the truth is, over every one of our lives, there are books written about us in heaven. It wasn't just King David, by the way. That in heaven, there are books written about you. When was the last time you felt sure enough to stand in a position and say, I know God has put me here? Because He wants that for all of us. Not everyone has to be a preacher. Not everyone has to stand with a microphone. Not everyone, at least not in this sense. But your life preaches whether you have a microphone or not. And when people listen to the message of our lives, what are they hearing? Are they hearing something that sounds like, I'm lost, there's no hope? Do our lives point to God? Do our lives point to faith? Do our lives point to the idea that there's something more? And when people get around us, do they find themselves more sure about what's happening in their life? Because the truth is that if God has put strength in us and we're walking in what God has put in us, then in that place it becomes contagious. And everyone around us starts to go, I don't know what that is, but what's different? Because I'm looking for a place to stand and I have no clue. And when we found that place to stand, it's not, oh, come look at me, you can stand on me. That's a terrible idea. It's, hey, I found a rock that I can stand on, and I'm gonna put my money on standing on that rock. There's all kinds of sand all around, and you can build whatever you want, wherever you want. That's not my business. That's between you and God. But I would say, hey, there's a rock that we can stand on, and he's solid. Think about David. So we're talking about David right now. I come in the scroll of the book that is written of me. And he writes this, psalm. We don't know specifically when in his life he wrote it. He may have wrote it when he was young, and kept it till he was older. But most likely, considering he was a shepherd when he was young, most likely David wrote this psalm when the tabernacle of David was up. He was king. The kingdom was flowing. They had overcome their enemies, and he's reflecting back on his life. But I want to point backwards in David's life also. So David, I feel to make this point, it's kind of in the beginning of his life, not the very beginning, but when David was anointed king and started winning battles for Israel, starting with Goliath and moving on from there, he was cast out by his own people, and it says Saul tried to kill him. Saul took the army of Israel and tried to chase David and kill David. Now, this is a man that David defended. This is a man that David protected. This is a man that David was leading his army, and he's trying to kill David. And while David is out in the wilderness trying to find this thing I'm talking about, he's been anointed to be king. Samuel, at the beginning, pours oil over him. We'll talk a little bit about that. He's anointed to be king, and yet he's running from his own kingdom, and the king of that kingdom is trying to kill him. How do you find strength and humility in that? But here's something that you can see from David's life. Did you ever hear of David's mighty men? All of a sudden, as David's out in the wilderness, he starts gathering these people to him that start following him. They end up becoming David's mighty men. But these were the outcasts, the ones that no one accepted. These were the ones that no one wanted. They were rejected. And David was able to find such strength in his life. And I don't mean his own life. I mean, in his life, he found strength. That'd be a better way to word it. In the Lord. And it became so contagious that even the rejected ones and the ones that no one wanted became David's mighty men. Remember, we're talking about humility. Because when you look at these mighty men, how many mighty men are in this room? Mighty women. It doesn't have to be men. That's just biblical language. How many mighty people are in this room? How many mighty people do we walk past every day and we think, oh, that guy's on a bench? And maybe not as much around here with that one. Homeless people. But the downcast, the down and out. Those are the ones that when God gets a hold of their life, it changes an entire town. It changes an entire region. Because God has put greatness in there. And when we find what God has written about us, when we trade in whatever story we're trying to write, when we set down the scroll that we're convinced we have to try to make happen, and we say, God, I can't defend myself, then all of a sudden the fullness starts to come because God sees that's a surrendered one. They're waiting on me. So I'm going to point to the life of David here. And I'm going to go to, I don't know if you guys know this, but 1 Samuel is all about the beginning. Samuel was the prophet that anointed David. He's the one that was sleeping at night, and the Lord called his name, and it ended up happening 3 times, and he ends up becoming the prophet over Israel. It actually says that none of his words fall to the ground. That's really amazing. To never speak wrongly, period. That takes God. But I'm going to go to 1 Samuel chapter 16 here. So Saul has already made a bunch of mistakes as king. He was the very first king of Israel, just so you guys know. Saul was anointed by Samuel, and he was who the people picked. God went to the people and said, I want to lead you. I want to be your king. And they said, give us a king. And he's like, well, he's going to put taxes on you, and he's going to want to marry your daughters, and take your lands, and your horses, and all the good things from you. You know that, right? Like, that's what a king does. And they're like, give us a king! Okay. And they picked the guy that was head and shoulders tall above everyone else. So it says Saul is taller than everybody else. And he actually hides while they're picking the king. And then he gets anointed and becomes king. He makes all these mistakes. He moves in pride. He doesn't listen to the Lord. And his kingdom gets stripped from him. So he's still king, per se, as far as the seat remains, but his authority from God has been removed at this point in 1 Samuel 16. I'm going to start at verse 1 and kind of skim through here pretty quickly, but it says, Now the Lord said to Samuel, How long will you mourn for Saul, seeing I've rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I am sending you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided myself a king among his sons. Then Samuel said, How can I go? If Saul hears, he will kill me. But the Lord said, Take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Then invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what you shall do. You shall anoint for me the one I named to you. So Samuel did what the Lord said and went to Bethlehem. And the elders of the town trembled at his coming and said, Do you come peaceably? Now, first of all, I want to know what was going on in Samuel's life. That when he came to a town, the elders, the protectors of the town shook. What was Samuel walking in? Can you imagine a guy walking into this town and, whoever, coming up and, maybe mayor, whatever. Do you come in peace? It's one man, Do you come peaceably? And he said, Peaceably. I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Sanctify yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice. Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. Now remember, Jesse is David's dad. And it says he consecrated Jesse and his sons. So it was when they came that he looked at Eliab, who was the oldest. You can find that out in the next chapter. It says that Eliab was the oldest, the firstborn. He looked at Eliab and said, Surely the Lord's anointed is before him. Saying, hey, this must be the guy. He's the firstborn. This is definitely the guy. But the Lord said to Samuel, Do not look at his appearance or at his physical stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord does not see as man sees. For man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. So Jesse called Abinadab and made him pass before Samuel. And he said, Neither has the Lord chosen this one. Then Jesse made Shammah pass by, and he said, Neither has the Lord chosen this one. Thus Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Samuel. And Samuel said to Jesse, The Lord has not chosen these. And Samuel said to Jesse, Are all of these young men here? And he said, There remains yet the youngest, and there he is keeping the sheep. And Samuel said to Jesse, Send and bring him, for we will not sit down till he comes here. So he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy, which means good looking, with bright eyes and good looking. And the Lord said, Arise, anoint him, for this is the one. Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So Samuel arose and went to Ramah. And it's easy looking at David's life in hindsight to say, oh yeah, that was just part of David's life. But imagine that the prophet is coming to Jesse's house. Imagine that the Lord's coming to your dad's house. And the table's set and you're hosting him. I'm sure they threw a meal and they all sat around the table. It's so good to have you here, Samuel. We're humbled that you came to our town. We're humbled that you came to our house. And they fed him and that kind of thing. It was customary to make an offering to a prophet when he came near. But Jesse has 7 of his sons at the table. Where's David? Was it such that Jesse thought of David as the unwanted child? Perhaps he was just out watching the sheep. But I know if I heard that God was going to be anointing one of my sons, and maybe this is just me, and I don't want to make any judgment against, something wrong in biblical life or my own life, whatever. I'm thinking okay, let's get them all in here. I'm going to get one of the servants to go watch the sheep, because they did have servants in those days. You find that out later too. It talks about David leaving someone in charge of the sheep when he goes to the battlefield to feed his brothers, so they had servants. But that night, Jesse didn't even bring David to the table. What kind of wound does that leave on a young person? You're not even invited to the table. In fact, you can be out with the servants and the sheep, and so I don't know how close their field was to the house, or if David was even near, but it's possible he sees the torches burning, he smells they're cooking dinner, and he's like, well, looks like Dad's having another party and hosting, but I got you, Dad. I'll watch the sheep. How does a man like this, that is rejected from his own household, go on to become one of the greatest kings that the world has ever told stories about? Now here's where I want to talk about humility and waiting on the Lord, and what happens when the Lord goes to battle for us. Because look at Samuel. He's even though he's a prophet, he's looking as everyone else looks. He looks at the oldest. He looks at the second oldest. He looks at the third oldest. And at that first one, he's ready. Okay, Lord, let's get this over with. Dump the oil. This is the guy. And the Lord has to stop him. This is not the guy. He goes down and he doesn't feel the Lord on any of them. And they bring him in. What I truly believe about David, and we're going to go on and talk a little bit out of 1 Samuel chapter 17, is that when he was in the field, so if you go into the end of chapter 16 first, let's see. At the end, in verse 23, it says, "And so it was, whenever the Spirit from God was upon Saul, that David would take a harp and play it with his hand. Then Saul would become refreshed and well, and the distressing spirit would depart from him." David knew how to play the harp here. So where did David learn how to play the harp? And if I were to make one statement about this whole thing, it's that authority comes from God, not man. Because we've been taught that you have to fight to get to the table. You have to fight and let everyone know who you are. You have to be there. You have to push your way into the situation. You have to speak the loudest. And if you don't get noticed, you've missed it. That's what a lot of American culture has taught us. If you can be the squeakiest wheel, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. You get up in there and you make sure everybody knows what's important to you. But the truth is that David, while he's in the field, he was meeting with God. He already knows how to play the harp by the time he gets anointed and goes to the palace. Where did he learn how to play the harp? In his time in the field, he would wait on God. He would play the harp. And not just play the harp, but tend his duties too. And God would meet with him. And as he's ministering to the Lord, I'm fully sure that God was healing David's hurts and wounds. That David was being fathered by God in the place of being rejected by his own family. Even if he might have slept in the house at night, we see what his dad thinks about him when the prophet comes to town and he's anointing the next king. So when we're in these situations where it seems like people don't know and people don't see, it's actually perfectly right ground for you to get the upgrade that God wants to give you so that you can walk in the fullness of your scroll. And like I said, we're talking about humility. Oh man, there's so much in here. We're talking about humility, and David. Oh my goodness. I'm sorry, I'm overwhelmed. There's so much in here. I'm going to go on to 17. I'm going to go to 1 Samuel 17, and we're going to talk about this. Now the Philistines gathered their armies together to battle, and were gathered at Succoth, which belongs to Judah. They encamped between Succoth and Azekah in Ephes Dammim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together, and they encamped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in battle array against the Philistines. The Philistines stood on a side of them on one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side, with a valley between them. Now mind you, this is chapter 17. In 16, David is anointed king. And he's the youngest. He's like a probably 17-year-old kid or something at this point. And a champion went out from the camp of the Philistines named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. So a cubit is if you hold your hand out from the tip of your elbow to the tip of your finger, about 1.5 feet. That was a biblical cubit. And a span is a measure from your thumb to your pinky, right there. So this guy was about 9.5 feet tall. Many people have problem believing something like that, but we read about the Nephilim in the Bible. The Nephilim were a mixed breed between heavenly beings and earthly people, and they were huge. Anyways, named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span, basically 10 feet tall. If he were to walk into this church, he'd have to duck to get through that door, to give you some perspective. He had a bronze helmet on his head and was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. And he had bronze armor on his legs and a bronze javelin between his shoulders. Now the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his iron spearhead weighed 600 shekels, and a shield bearer went before him. Then he stood and cried out to the armies of Israel and said to them, "Why have you come out to line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? And you the servants of Saul?" There's a mix-up right there, by the way. They called Israel the servants of Saul. And it may have been true because they were terrified of Goliath. But it wasn't true of David. Because David may have served Saul, but he was a servant of God. Why have you come out to line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine and you servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and servants. And the Philistines said, "I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now David was the son of that Ephrathite of Bethlehem, Judah, whose name was Jesse, who had 8 sons. And the man was old, advanced in years in the days of Saul. The 3 oldest sons of Jesse had gone to follow Saul into battle. The names of his 3 sons who went to the battle were Eliab the firstborn, next to him Abinadab, and third Shammah. David was the youngest, and the 3 oldest followed Saul. But David occasionally went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. And the Philistine drew near and presented himself 40 days, morning and evening. Then Jesse said to his son David, "Take now for your brothers an ephah of this dried grain and these 10 loaves, and run to your brothers at the camp. And carry these 10 cheeses to the captain of the 1,000, and see how your brothers fare, and bring back news of them." Now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines. I find it very interesting that it says that they're in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines, because thus far all that has happened is kind of a yelling match back and forth. It says they're fighting with the army of the Philistines. Anyways. So David rose early in the morning, left the sheep with the keeper. So a keeper, they had people that could watch the sheep. It wasn't that there weren't people that could watch the sheep. And took the things and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the camp as the army was going out to fight and shouting for the battle. For Israel and the Philistines had drawn up in battle array, army against army. And David left his supplies in the hand of the supply keeper, ran to the army, and came and greeted his brothers. Then as he talked with them, there was the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, coming up from the army of the Philistines. And he spoke according to the same words. So David heard them. And all the men of Israel, when they saw this man, fled from him and were dreadfully afraid. So the men of Israel said, "Have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel. And it shall be that the man who kills him, the king will enrich with great riches, will give him his daughter, and give his father's house exemption from taxes in Israel." Then David spoke to the man who stood by him, saying, "What shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine, and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God?" Now notice the change, that David has a different lens than everyone else. It says the Philistine says, "Send me a man. I defy the armies of Israel." And then David comes, and his perspective is totally different than what other people on the battlefield are seeing. He says, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" David wasn't just fighting a battle of flesh against flesh. He was seeing what was happening in a heavenly perspective. And the people answered him in this manner, saying, "So shall it be done for the man who kills him." So they told him what they were saying. Now Eliab, the oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men. And Eliab's anger was aroused against David, and he said, "Why did you come down here? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride." I'm talking about humility. "I know your pride and the insolence of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle." Sometimes when you start this walk doing what God's told you to do, other people will misunderstand and they will chuck spears at you. "I know your pride." David was actually there to take food to his brothers. And by the way, he's anointed to be king. This guy's talking to the future king like that. "I know your pride and your insolence. You came to watch the battle." Those are accusations. Arrows of accusation. "For you have come down to see the battle." And David said, "What have I done now? Is there not a cause?" Then he turned from him towards another and said the same thing. And these people answered him as the first ones did. "He's there with his brothers, and they're all accusing him." You're proud, man. So not only did he get not invited to the table by his dad, he's beat up by his brothers. He's the outcast of the family. Now when the words which David spoke were heard, they reported them to Saul, and he sent for them. Then David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine." Now Saul said to David, "You are not able to go against the Philistine to fight with him, for you are a youth, and he a man of war from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant used to keep his father's sheep." I find it very interesting here, by the way. Your servant used to keep his father's sheep. He just came straight from the flock to the battlefield. And already he's got this mindset of this is going to happen. That's something I used to do. My life's different now. "Your servant used to keep his father's sheep. And when a lion or a bear came and took out a lamb from the flock, I went out after it and struck it and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it arose against me, I caught it by its beard and struck and killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God." Moreover, David said, "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion, from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." Now remember, we're talking about humility. And Goliath's offer was, "You send a man out, and I'm going to fight." If you lose, you serve us. If I lose, we serve you. So what's on the line here? This is a 17-year-old kid. Sure, he might have been a little stout, probably thin, maybe scrappy, they might say. But literally all of Israel is standing there looking at this giant yelling at them. And here comes David as a 17-year-old boy. What had to happen in that moment that saw something more than just the pride of the young man? Because we're talking about pride versus humility. What did David know that when he spoke to Saul and he said, no, this guy's defying the armies of the living God? For this kid to go to the king and say, I'm going to fight him. The king literally put the whole kingdom in David's hand at that point. If he loses, the Israelites become slaves. And the king says, okay, no big deal. We'll just have to serve you for the rest of our lives if you lose. I don't think that's how it works. But there was something different here. And again, I feel like this point I'm trying to make, maybe I'm not quite getting there. But the whole thing is, when there's substance to your life because you know who God is and what He'll do for you and what He'll do in you and what He'll do with you, then when you step into these situations and you make a claim, if you will, it's not scary because you know God is there to back it up. It's not wrong to know what you're capable of. It's not wrong to be able to do great things. These are all part of true humility. There's a guy named Jordan Peterson. He talks about the only way to have true humility is to know your strength. Because unless you have to step backwards and tame that strength in order to do something, you don't have real meekness. Real meekness comes when you know what you're capable of. And yet you walk in situations where you can call other people higher and not have to dominate everything. But how many people are willing to explore what they're capable of? How many people never stepped on the battlefield to find out what God was willing to do? Because we have a generation of people who are walking around feeling like shaved lions. And when they get home, they have frustration and anger, and they accidentally take it out on their family, and they wonder, what's missing in my life? And they walk around not knowing what real humility is. Because they've never stepped into the fullness of a calling. They don't know what's written about them in heaven. And that is a major issue. It is a major issue to not know what God thinks about you. It is a major issue to not have the boldness to step into who you are and what you're supposed to do. Not just for your sake, but here's the truth of it. That when you don't know who you are, there are situations out there waiting for you. There are problems that God's like, who can I send? I designed this situation exactly for you. It was meant for you. You are the answer to that problem. But we've walked around thinking that humility means you never step into any authority and you're afraid to confront people unless you're angry inside. And we've let anger become the gatekeeper to our authority. The only time I ever really express how I feel is when I'm angry enough to explode at someone. And that is so wrong. Whereas if we can find a consistency with God, that when we step into these battlefields, instead of them frustrating us, how many people are facing Goliaths? There are major circumstances in everyone's life, even if it's not named Goliath, even if it's not wearing bronze armor. But the question is, have we been walking in such a way with the Lord that when we come up against it, oh no, I got this. Not because I'm strong, but because I know what God wants to do. I'll go, God, let's do this. And that's what God is looking for. He's looking for people who go through the process with Him. David went through a dying process. David went through a process where he was rejected by his family. He was not seen. And I know that his heart was handling it right because God chose him. God would not have chosen him for no reason. In the field, he's ministering to God. He's making these decisions. He's holding himself before the Lord, becoming vulnerable to God. And in that process, God chooses him outside of his own power or his own understanding. And actually, if you read through this story in 17 and 18 of 1 Samuel, there are places where David starts to get favor with all these people, and Saul is insulted. But it says repeatedly, David held himself wisely. There are all these attacks and all these verbal things and these little... It says Saul watched him. He had jealous eyes for David because they had a saying. After David slew Goliath, they said, Saul's killed his thousands, but David's killed his 10,000s. So there was a jealousy. But repeatedly in the testing of his character amongst the people of Israel, it says, David behaved wisely. David behaved wisely. That means character had been formed in his heart. He had gone through the process of God to become who he was meant to be. This is the difference between the called and the chosen. It says, many are called, but few are chosen. There was a whole army worth of people on the battlefield from Israel. But the only one that could do it was the one that God had chosen. And that is a mission between David and God. And whatever's going on in our lives, it may seem bigger than us. It may seem insurmountable. It may seem like, why should I think that God's chosen me to solve this problem? But honestly, if you step back and you look at it, why not? If you're going through the process of God and you believe that you're a Christian, which right now you're in church, so that means you may have some kind of inclination towards at least being interested in a God. Many people in here, I would say, claim to be Christian. But if you're a Christian and you believe God has touched your life, we're not meant to be walking around in life constantly wondering if we are in God's will. We're not meant to go through life. When people look at us, they feel that same insecurity in their own lives. There's supposed to be a marked difference, not for any kind of pride, not for any kind of self-glorification, not because I told you so or I'm better than you or anything like that, but simply because God is worthy of it. We're meant to reflect his character and his image. God has never been overcome. And we're going around telling people he lives in our hearts, but we've been walking around overcome. And if there's any kind of conviction hitting this room from this sermon, it is absolutely not meant to be any kind of crushing, pressing down, you're not good enough thing. It is meant to be there's something more for us. There's something more that Jesus died for. That is the level he believes in us. Not believed past tense, not your day has gone past, not you've messed up too much. But if you feel conviction in your heart, that means there's still something going on where it's like, I am hungry for that. I am hungry to see God get what he paid for my life. I want to be able to come in the fullness of the scroll, the book that is written about me. I don't want to walk around wondering if I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I want to live all in. And I want to live in such a way that when I'm all in, I stick with God through all the trials. And I stick with God through all the temptations. And I don't veer to the left or to the right. And I don't get hurt in the heart when my brothers say, what are you doing here? You shouldn't be here. You're full of pride. You're not good enough. I know you came to watch the battle. You're ignoring the sheep again. I want to be in the place that when my brothers, and I don't just mean my physical brothers, but when people, when they say to me, you're proud, I can't believe you would do that. I don't even have to tell them that I killed a lion or a bear. I don't need to defend myself that way. I can walk in the place where I know God sees me. And I know that God, who sees what's done secretly, will reward me openly. Matthew 6:6. But God is calling a generation of people. Listen, there are people that have been killing lions and killing bears. And the problem is that we get that. Here's the lion. You kill it and you drag it out and you say, hey, everybody, look what I did. Because we don't feel good enough. We're walking around trying to wear that as a reason for people to accept us. Look what I can do. But the truth is, that's not the way. Yes, David may say that in front of the king because the king doesn't know. But David was stuck in the field, and yet he became king. And that's the path God has laid out for us. If we learn to wait on God as David waited on God, if we learn to die to ourselves in the process of God, then when these situations present themselves, we will be carrying answers because we have a history with the King. I can't tell you how many times in our own life we've done things that so many people, they were like, you guys are crazy. And a lot of times it felt like an arrow. It felt like a javelin. Some of them thought they were caring for us. I remember one time, Harmony, she was probably, how old was she? 7 months when she fell out of the cart? Harmony was 9 months old, and we were at a thrift store. And Tanya had her in the cart in the upper part, and it didn't have a seatbelt. And she comes around the corner. I'm standing over here around the corner, and the cart's here, and she's here. She comes around, and she holds up these two purses. She says, which one do you like? And I hear, and I was like, oh no. And I see the look on her face. She drops the purses, runs over. I run over, and she fell head first straight over the side of the cart and hit the floor. And I'm going, oh my goodness, oh my goodness, oh my goodness, Jesus, Jesus. And of course, you just go right to Jesus, bless her, Jesus, no pain. And people are coming around from other aisles and looking. And I'm like, oh, what are we going to do, Lord? What are we going to do, Lord? Lord, what do we do? Lord, what do we do? Our answer isn't in this or this or this. Our answer is in you. Our answer is in you. Our answer is in you. We're going to trust you, God. We're going to trust you, God. And there's a lady coming up, and she goes, just so you know, I'm a nurse. You need to take her to the hospital right now. With that same thing on her face. Right now. Like angry almost. You know, like, I can't believe you would let your child fall on the floor kind of thing. You know what I mean? And I'm like, oh, Jesus, now we got people looking at us. And you get all the negative thoughts of who are they going to call? What's going to happen? Oh, my goodness. So we take her out to the car. And she's wailing. Yeah! And Tanya's crying. And I'm crying. Like, oh, God, what are we going to do? You know, the world is melting in front of us. And okay. And I feel that nudge from the Lord of, son, I got you. Son, I got you. Don't worry about what they're saying. Don't worry about what you think they're going to do. Just listen to my voice. And I started having these clear thoughts where I was like, see if she can follow your fingers. So I just my finger back and forth. And she's looking at my finger. I said, you know, she might have had a couple words, mom and dad, and these things. I said, Harmony, can you say mom? Can you say mom? Mom. You know, can you say dad? Dad. And I'm going, okay, calm down. Calm down. She can remember words. All right. She's able to track my finger. Okay. All right. So we called our friend that was a nurse. You know, we started to get these clear thoughts. We called our friend that was a nurse. We felt peace about it. And she says, well, do this and this and this. And, you know, we're checking everything and whatever. And yeah, she's okay. Like, okay, we feel peace about this. And I mean, within an hour, she's back to her normal self, no nothing. And we're like, and none of you can attest to the fact that she's not smart. She's brilliant. Thank God. But we face the giant then. Are we going to trust God? Are we going to trust in what He says? Many people wrestle with that, but for us, that was the match that was in front of us. You know, according to someone else's life's measure, that might have been irresponsible. Just as David's brothers didn't think he was supposed to be at the front of the battlefield. They said, what are you doing here? But you have to know where you stand with God. And you have to be willing to accept the consequences of what it means when you stand in that place with God. That's part of the package. And that's really hard. But when you step into a place of faith, things will happen. And you have to stand in that place and say, well, I stood in this place believing, God, I'm sorry I missed it. You know, if something wrong happens or that kind of thing, that's tough. Then, you know, talking about where we're at now, we had our second child as a home birth. She had been in labor for 30-some hours. And we're thinking, oh gosh, we made the wrong decision. And, you know, when you're sleep deprived, just like when the baby fell out of the cart, you got all this stuff coming at you. Oh, we're making a huge mistake. We need to go to the hospital. Oh, this is wrong. Why? Oh, what if this goes on with the baby? Have you felt the baby move? And, you know, you got all these thoughts and these things coming at you. Just like Goliath's yelling at you when you make these decisions to stand in faith. Because for us, it was a faith decision to have home births. And then finally, you know, within a short time, baby comes out, Eden comes out perfect as can be. And one of the things we were wrestling with Eden is the water didn't break, and we heard that the water has to break, you know. So, and we've learned a lot since then. But we thought, oh no, what if she's, you know, whatever. But then when the water didn't break, she comes out within like a minute or two of the water breaking and the cords around her neck. And I find out that basically the baby, until it's exposed to air, the baby doesn't try to start breathing. And the fact that the water didn't break until like a minute before she was born, she comes out. Now, I might be telling this all wrong, medically speaking. Barb's probably back there like, what are you talking? But to me, it was providence that the water didn't break until like a minute before she was born. And she comes out and just unwrap the cord and, you know, give her a little, she starts crying, okay, she's okay. That was a giant. That was a moment where we faced a giant and we came out the other side. There was real risk in the game. There was real skin. There was real chance for failure. It was not safe. The first mission trip to Albania. You hear Albania's got a mafia and all these different things, and you go there and oh boy. And then you come back and you're like, that was one of the most amazing things of my life. I'm glad I didn't listen to all the things that were telling me not to go to Albania. And all of these things were little things that began to teach me who I am before the Lord. To teach me who my family is and who He'll be to my family. Or in Thailand, we went to Thailand this year. And some of you have heard the story, but you know, we're at the Thailand airport, and Thailand is known for trafficking. And we're thinking, oh gosh, God, are we supposed to be taking our kids to Thailand? These are young blonde babies, and everybody there has dark hair. They stick out like a sore thumb. And we're thinking, is this what we're supposed to be doing? But the Lord was very clear. So we stepped out, and we're in the Thailand airport, and it's 4 stories. And we hit the button on the 4th floor, and 2 of the kids walk out, and then the door closes, and we start going down and going, oh no. Oh, we messed up. I'm so sorry, Lord, that we came to Thailand, you know, like whatever it is. Oh, I can't believe that just happened. Oh, help me, Jesus. And we're praying, and I'm thinking, I'm going to stop this. You know, then we're pressing all of the buttons. And now it's stopping the whole way down, and we're not thinking clearly. And we get back up to the top, and they're not there. And I open, and I say, Harmony! I start screaming from the elevator. And like, everybody's looking, like, what's that white guy doing? Not very many white people. But Harmony! And, you know, her and Ellie come walking on the corner. Hey, Dad. How you doing? Where did you guys go? Oh, we just went to look for you. What? There's probably 50,000 people here. And you're walking looking for you know. But in that moment, it was another thing where God says, this is who you are, and this is who I will be for you. We had skin in the game, and things happened that seemed outside of our control. And we could have failed, and terrible things could have happened, but they didn't. And when you put yourself in that place of, I believe God, and you've been listening for His voice, and He responds, like He did with David, and all throughout the Bible, with Moses, with Abraham, He responded to all of them. When you step into that place and you really take that risk, then you learn more who you are, and you learn more who God is. And it may be as simple as telling someone, I'm a Christian and I love Jesus, and I believe Jesus loves you too. Many people feel like saying that to probably 100 people a day, but they never take the risk. They walk around thinking, well, I don't want to offend somebody. You could get 100 reasons, just like we had 100 reasons not to take our kids to Thailand. But ultimately, until you overcome those things, and you just do whatever it is in your heart to do, if you know that it's good, if you know that it's pointed at God, if He has given you that inner knowing, that peace, that thing of, hey, this is my voice, then don't second guess it. You go for it. And when you get up to heaven, even if you missed it, if you miss it in the place of, I wanted to tell Him about you, Jesus. I was trying to make you smile. I want to make your heart happy, Father. My kid could try to draw a horse and draw a stick figure person and totally mess it up and bring it to me. Hey, Dad, I drew this for you. It doesn't matter to me that they drew a stick figure person with a pig nose and tried to call it a horse. It makes me happy because they did it and they thought of me. That's the heart of God. We've had many people who never take any risks with the Lord. They never put themselves out there because of fear of man, because of the fear of being misunderstood. Because of the wonderful things He does. I had to do it. But God is looking for people who aren't afraid of looking foolish. I mean, I'm being a little blunt and silly right now. But who's going to be different? Because if you look like everyone else, then there is no stable whatever. You're not. Everyone tries to walk around and convince everyone that they're unique by trying to be like everyone else. Don't you see that I'm unique? I have the same clothes that you wear. I smell with the same cologne you've got. I say the same weird words you say. That makes me special. So true humility is walking down a road with God where you have real vulnerability in relationship with Him. And where you have real vulnerability in relationship with the people around you. And from that place, you begin to take risks to figure out who you are. How many of you guys started a company, you know? That was a huge risk. There's so much stuff in there. Applied for a new job after being in the same place for 10 years. This is nothing completely foreign. We just have to reframe the risks we're taking. Because we're willing to do a lot of that for money, but are we willing to do that to figure out who we are? Are we willing to do that to find identity? Because it doesn't all have to be about the money. It doesn't all have to be about making more money. It can be about taking risks because you feel something from the Lord. It's in us. We just have to look at the motivations. All right. I think we're done for the day. Did you guys stand up with me?